And from the backwoods of Virginia, I'm Daniel Markham with danielbmarkham.locals.com. And I'm trying something new today. I'm interviewing Ron Jeffries, and Ron and I have sort of been internet sort of acquaintances off and on. I think we've been friends on Twitter maybe. We have a bunch of mutual friends, and so I'm really looking forward to this, Ron. And let's see, first I should talk about Ron Jeffries before I bring the screen on here. So Ron has his own wiki page. He was part of the Extreme Programming guys. He's written 3 books I could find: Nature of Software Development, Extreme Programming Installed, which I have, Extreme Programming Adventures in C#. He's doing some cool stuff with the language development platform Cody I want to talk about, and he was one of the Agile Manifesto guys. So let me paste you on here, Ron. I forgot to do that. Hang on here. Screen. And there you are.
Oh, this is so high tech.
Well, yeah, I guess if you can't do video now, you just can't you can't do anything anymore, eh?
Yeah.
So Ron, where do you live at?
I live in Pinckney, Michigan, which is kind of due north of Ann Arbor, maybe a little west. So we think of ourselves as Ann Arbor people, but really we live in the tiny little town of Pinckney or outside of it.
You have been doing programming things for a while?
Somewhat over a half century, yeah.
That's a bit. You didn't just get started last week.
No, I didn't just start last week, although sometimes I make mistakes that make me think I started last week.
Oh, yeah, programming keeps you humble.
It does.
So I was Googling you this morning, and there's so many dang things to talk about. I'm just going to leave this open. What would you like to talk about?
Well, I don't know. As I look back on all the stuff I've been doing, and especially the past, I guess 20 years now, really, of Agile extreme programming stuff, I realize that when people ask me to give a talk at a conference, virtually now, of course, because nobody goes anywhere anymore, I almost feel like I want to say, well, no, why don't you get somebody who's coming up, somebody who's younger, somebody who is in a different place. My main interest has always been in the developers. And the thing I liked about extreme programming, the thing I liked about Agile, was that it put responsibility and authority back in the hands of developers. It didn't just assume that developers were somebody who took some kind of a specification and translated it into another language without using their brains.
Yeah, it's a big hobby horse for me.
And I felt that, based on particularly on the experience with the C3 project, that if you had software that was working and that was improving every cycle, you could change the conversation between management and development. My history with management and development was that we were working toward a deadline and we didn't really intend to have anything until the deadline, and then of course we really didn't have anything then either and had to run over. And that turned the conversation always into them beating on the developers to go faster and do stuff because they legitimately wanted something. And the style of Agile, which is to have running software on the very first day and keep it running thereafter, lets you change the conversation. You still don't have all the features, but you can at least say, look, we have this, it works. If you would give us the next best thing to do, we'll do that next. It would change the relationship in a way that would be positive for both sides. So lately, I've been really just focusing on the development side, and with all, as you mentioned, all these little articles I'm writing with Cody Alua. And I'm doing that probably more to keep my head out of the news than for any other purpose. I believe I have 3 or 4 readers of those articles, but mostly I do them because I enjoy them.
Yes. And you 3 or 4 guys come over here and join my 3 or 4 guys. It'll be 8 or 9 people.
That's plenty. That's plenty of people.
So, I don't know what the technical background of people watching this. Just assuming you're a developer, XP was a set of technical practices, as I recall, and Agile was sort of a more encompassing set of values and practices all around software development. But XP was the more technical part of that, right?
Well, I would say that XP wasn't just technical. If you look at Scrum, which is certainly the major Agile method today, it has a cycle called the sprint, because they thought that was a good name, which is 1, 2, 4 weeks long of develop some stuff and have it ready to go, and then do it again, and then do it again, do it again. Well, XP has that same cycle.
Right.
But the focus inside of XP was on, and how shall we do this? And so it included development practices. Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-creators of Scrum, claims that Kent Beck said he was going to steal Scrum's ideas and put them into XP, and claims to have a memo that says that he did that. Whether he did that or not, or whether, as Kent recalls, he got the idea from somewhere else, the outside cycle of how do we relate to the customer is in both systems. But yeah, XP is the only method that really includes technical practices, and in a way, it's to me a little bit sad that it got subsumed by Scrum, because Scrum leaves that out, and the result in the case of Scrum is that perhaps 1% of as many people who are trained as Scrum Masters are trained as developers.
Wow, that's
You would
another
think
big.
there would be 5 or 10 times as many developers as there are Scrum Masters, since one Scrum Master has a whole team. But in fact, just because of the nature of the market and stuff, the attempt to train up developers in how to do Agile has been pretty weak, pretty unsuccessful. I don't know if, some people are trying very hard, but it hasn't been successful.
So, Ron, just to give you a little background on me, since I guess a little level setting, I'm a hands-on programmer myself. I came up doing stuff around the local area, meeting the customer, talking to them, coding in front of them. I could tell people I was doing Agile before there was an Agile. And then I ended up getting into somehow, I don't know, maybe I lived a bad life, got a gypsy curse. I ended up doing some coaching for a while. I got to see Scrum and Agile and XP work in big corp quite a bit. I'm still a coder at heart. My passion is that conversation between the business and the programmer. I like both sides of that a lot, and I like that interaction. So I just wanted to give you that background before I ask you this question. What the hell happened? I mean, for folks who remember the rational unified process, it was kind of started off kind of simple, and it just turned into this monster. And I get the feeling that, well, maybe not XP, but Agile certainly has gone that way.
It's yes, it's a good question. What the hell happened? The first thing that happened really was the recession, right? Very shortly after the Agile Manifesto, the economy kind of went to hell, and that meant that all of us guys who were basically freestanding consultants had to find a way to get work done, and that kind of broke apart what had been just like 1 or 2 meetings of all these guys coming together, and everybody kind of had to be independent, had to get his own thing done, and the Scrum people found a way to market Scrum, which is so simple, such a simple framework that you can almost not mention it as you sell it. And they sold this notion of the Scrum Master, who is basically a team coach, who supposedly understands Scrum and helps the team do Scrum and helps the team communicate and and does all the different directions. And they sold a couple of days worth of training and the idea that the Scrum Master could help you do Scrum and that would save your life, and everything would be great. So Scrum basically outmarketed all the other methods. But when you try and do that sort of thing, Agile or Scrum, in a big company, all the processes, whether XP or Scrum or any, only talked about what to do with a team. They never talked about what to do with 2 teams or with the whole organization. And so a market for what we call scaling grew up. And in order to respond to that market, there were some kind of bad ideas originally from Scrum and elsewhere. And then we got SAFe from
Ooh, I forgot about it.
the other
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
And SAFe, if you look at it very carefully, is created by some of the people who created RUP, and it is kind of RUP with an Agile name, an Agile letter in its name, A. SAFe, the A stands for Agile. And what SAFe is it's got kind of three layers. And the top layer I think is rather good, which is it asks the company itself to focus on a few products and to focus on how those things are going to be streamed out. And I think that's good. Its middle layer is just too much middle management for my taste. And the bottom layer is supposedly Scrum plus XP. And if it were Scrum plus XP, then then that would be a good way to do the bottom layer. The problem is that when somebody buys a scaling solution, whether it's that one or a better one, I can name a better one, they are somebody up in the company who's decided that that's the thing we're going to do. We do digital transformations, we do DevOps, we do Agile, and it's just like this big boom. Let's do Agile. Well, even if we're talking about the level that you like to focus on, where it's between the developers and business, that's real working people talking to each other. That's not big management guys sending out messages saying Agile, Agile. And so as corporations try to get on this bandwagon, I think they are fundamentally limited and almost unable to do it, because a fundamental property of a corporation is its ability to endure. Corporations have to be impervious to change in the outside world, or else they go out of business. Or occasionally they become very innovative, but that's rare. And so the focus today is on the corporations, because that's where the money is, as we used to say when we were in the bank robbing business. And they're a market that isn't really responsive to the ideas that underlie the Agile Manifesto.
I'm curious if you saw this. One of the things I saw with working with big corporations was they already had what they considered to be a system in place to train developers and staff. And so when you came with Agile or XP or SAFe or whatever, they're like, oh, we've already got this sort of structure set up for training. Kaboom, we'll just train all the developers and then they'll be doing stuff right now. And I mean, they viewed it as just another sort of cog in the training machine instead of being sort of a transformational experience. Have you seen that?
I have seen that, and it's unfortunately not even common to do that, because I fancy that if somebody who understood what my colleagues and I understand about how to do Agile at the programming level, if you had a week with the programmers, you could, by God, change what they did. You can't do it in a day. You can't do it with a lecture. But if you sit down with them and say, now we are going to do this, do it, they can begin to learn. You can't become an expert in a week any more than you can become an expert guitar player in a week, but you could learn a few chords. Most companies don't even do that. It's almost impossible to get a week of a team's time because they're very busy, and for some reason we can't afford to spend that money, even though it would speed us up almost instantly if we did so. So more commonly than even plugging it in is, well, these people are already trained. We hired them because they were trained, and therefore they should know how to do it. And they just don't. It's a different style of development. It's a different way of thinking about the code. And it's not one, in my opinion, I try, I have now 130, I think, articles on Space Invaders and asteroids, talking about how I develop it in an Agile style. I can only begin to scratch the surface about what's going on. You have to try it and do it to understand it. It's like any real skill. You can't learn carpentry by watching YouTube videos. You got to cut some wood, and it's the same with this new style of development.
I feel kind of stupid. When I started coaching, I thought I would coach, Well, I just thought I would sort of tell people what to do, PowerPoints or demo code or whatever, and they would sort of understand what I was saying, and I did. I tried to tell them how things worked, and I'd do a demo, and everybody smiled and nodded their head. And then they just went off and did the same crap they did before.
Exactly.
And it wasn't until we started like mob programming, 101 coding, that I realized that, okay, you don't know what you don't know. And until we actually sort of interact, you're just going to smile because it all sounds like kind of apple pie and motherhood stuff.
Yeah. In the article that I'm just about to put up today, I did the third way of solving this particular problem that I have in my little Space Invaders program, which was how to get the constants into the program. And I have coded and shown in my articles 3 different ways to do this very trivial thing. Because until I did them, I didn't know what I didn't like about them. You can read the Stack Overflow on how to do something, and you can cut it in and paste it, but you don't understand it until you write your own. And so even at the small level, they have to learn. But it's worse. I have a horror story. Chet Hendricks and I were training a certified developer class at a very large corporation, made up of their top people, the ones that they were going to put on the Agile project that they all considered to be very, very top people. And one of the problems that we typically do in that class is a little sample payroll program, just because we know a lot about payroll, so we can make up a lot of stories. And one of the stories in the payroll program is federal tax should be calculated as 25% of gross pay. Okay. Now, we say, in the long run, there'll be a tax program to call, but right now, we just use 25% of gross pay. So they go off and they do this story, and they write an acceptance test for it, and they do all this stuff. And in the acceptance test, there was some set of numbers like gross pay equals 100, check to see what federal tax is. And when we looked at the code, it said, get federal tax times 100. Okay. And then we looked down further in the code to say, no, I think it said divided by 100. So then we looked down further in the code, and it said, what is, for the calculated federal tax, it said federal tax equals gross pay times 25 or some number like that.
Right.
And so they had put in an extra factor of 100 on one side, and they divided it out in the display of the answer. We asked the question, what is the meaning of this 100 of the people who wrote it? They could not answer it. They did not know the meaning of dividing a percentage times 100. They couldn't understand their own code when it was like one line. And we've noticed a lot that programmers that you would think would be pretty darn good don't know a lot of the basics. And if you think about it, they say that the programming community is doubling every 5 years. That pretty much means the average programmer has less than 5 years experience. And a lot of them, most of them probably don't have a computer education. They might have a math education, but a lot of them don't have a science education at all. So all they will have ever learned about programming is what they will have got on the job or pulled out of Stack Overflow or found in some random place. They haven't read a book. They don't know what cohesion and coupling are. They don't know the basics that almost all of us who came up through history learned kind of the hard way. We didn't have even sometimes books to read, but we read all the books that existed, and we talked to each other, and we went to conferences, and we learned, we did all these things because we were excited to learn programming. There's a much lower level, I think, of quality in out there, just because of the youth of these people in the community. And I think that's often particularly true in the companies that need millions of programmers,
Yeah.
because they have to lower their standard in order to get the 10,000 programmers that they think they require.
So,
And
so I'm going to relate a quick story and then ask you if you've experienced. My wife and I were just talking about this morning, and the fact that it's so easy to think you already know something when you're doing videos, and other people might not know what you're talking about. I did have done quite a few interviews for programmers over the years, and I remember, wow, I interviewed several people that were just spot on with their knowledge. You know, this is how you write a class, this is how you write a method, they had all this knowledge, and then I would ask, but why would you make a class? And it's just like they had no idea why they would or would not do anything. They know how to do it. I wonder, and here's my question. There's this thing we did when we came up, which is you sit down at the computer, you have a problem to solve, and you kind of hang there with it while you're solving the problem until you feel as if you've actually understood and solved it the best way possible, and you learn doing that. And I get the feeling that, is it your experience that people aren't doing that anymore? They're making the tests pass or whatever, and they're just kind of bailing out?
well, I think there's some truth to that, and I think it comes from management pressure. Sorry. I think that corporations want their software and they want it now, and because they don't see the software, they put a lot of pressure on. They want to make sure everybody's working hard, and so developers don't have time to craft. They don't have time to even try the thing three ways. Stop. They just get it to work and go. They don't have time to test it, go handle it on bug reports. So I think a lot of it comes from both explicit and implicit management pressure. I coached a team in Florida some years ago, and I sat in there on the planning meeting, and the team, talked with the product owner, understood all of the stories, knew what they could do, and then they talked among themselves. And they said, "Okay, we think we can do these 6 things." And their on-site coach guy said, "Let's go for 8." and they said, "Well, we think we can do 6 things." He said, "No, come on, let's go for 8. We can do it. Let's go for 8. Come on, yeah, rah rah."
So because he's a coach guy, he's supposed to.
Right. He says, "Okay, we'll try for 8." So I checked and learned without much difficulty by just asking one random person. They had never hit a target in all of the weeks they had been doing this stuff. So I talked to the coach offline. I said, you're causing these people to fail by asking them to do more than they think they can do, and they have never successfully done it. And he said, people have to have stretch goals. Well, I say bullshit. People do not have to have stretch goals. If you have stretch goals, you will try to do all 8 things, and if you do them, you will have done every one of them at 95% or 90% instead of 100%. I would rather have 6 at 100% than 8 at even 99%. Because 99%, that 1% bug crashes your system.
I had a team once, and I was coaching, 10 or 20 teams when I went to my first big corp kind of deal, and because I was just lightly coaching them. And we were going through sprint 1, and the product owner used to be the software architect. And so we get to the part where we're doing backlogs. He says, "No, hang on, I've got this all on a spreadsheet." And I'm just like, oh shit. And so he came in with this spreadsheet with 50, 80 columns in it, and he had pre-thought through how it was all going to work. And he did the same thing. I asked him how many stories they could do. "Oh, you guys can do 5 or 6. And they just kept zeroing out over and over again. And I mean, they would take 5, 0. They would take another 3, 0. Just went on for 3 sprints. And finally, the product owner said, "You were right. I shouldn't have brought that stuff in or done any of the stuff I was going to do." I think that you do have to have some kind of stress to learn, but as a professional, you bring the stress internally. That's going to be a professional. That's the that's the thing you should carry around. It shouldn't be if somebody has to, put stress on you to do stuff, then you're just like a donkey or a trained rabbit or something. That's well.
Well, it makes you look away. If you are looking at the program and feeling, oh, this ain't going well or whatever, you're looking at the program. But if your management is saying, go faster, go faster, go faster, you're looking at management and you're worried about what are they going to do to me, and you're not worried about your program anymore. Now, I have learned over the course of lots of programming that when I'm programming, if my neck starts to get stiff, there's something wrong with my code. And if I were wise, I would revert and start over. Because every time you start over, you can immediately do the thing right, and whatever mistake you had made before, you won't make it again, and it'll turn out better. So I have learned that again and again and again, and I still do it. I do it in these programs I'm writing on my iPad at home. I will be programming away, and of course I write my articles concurrently with the programming. And I'll be writing, this really doesn't feel very good to me. I think this is really screwed up. Code. I'm really feeling awful about this. I put even too much pressure on myself to do my best work.
Yes.
And finally, like yesterday, I ran into this, and I thought I didn't have a decent revert point. And I finally just said, this ain't working, and said, I don't care how far back I got to revert. I'm reverting out of this. Pop out, started over again, and of course, it just went right in. So the pressure thing is a dangerous one, I think, even when it's our own. But we can get a rather high level of internal pressure that is kind of balanced by joy. That's balanced by the fact that you are, in fact, getting it. That's better. Ooh, still not good, but yeah, better. And many of us, I'm sure this is true of you, I know it's true of me and many of the other colleagues in the Agile area, we do this work because we love it. There's a lot of programmers in the world today that do this work so that they can go home and feed their family, who have come into it as a job, as a way of making a living. I have always felt that I was incredibly fortunate to find a way, that was weird, of making a living that didn't involve something I considered work, that involved something I considered fun. And that changes your whole outlook, I think, on pressure.
I had a blast when I got started programming back with the 4K PET. But now it sort of went away for a while. I think it went away during the 00 period because those code bases just got so gnarly, like some of the C++ Windows libraries and such. But then I got back to functional programming in the last few years, pure functional programming, and the fun has come back. I love writing 100 lines of code and then kind of going, and then you end up with 6, and you're like, holy shit, where did that come from? And it's just, I would rather do that than anything. It's a beautiful feeling. Do you think there are tools are kind of discouraging people from actually enjoying the job?
Certainly the tools are not as marvelous. The tools that people normally have to play with are not as marvelous as some of the tools that we played with that are great. I haven't done functional programming for a long time, but back when I did, it had that marvelous feeling of it's just, you make this nicely shaped thing and it just kind of turns out to be very sweet. If you do really good object-oriented stuff with Smalltalk, it's the same. In Smalltalk, if you go to look to see how something is implemented, you can just click on it and it'll show you the implementation. And you follow the implementation all the way down, and somebody at the bottom will say 6, and the 6 rolls back up and you have an answer. And the Smalltalk environment is so immediate that you can just change anything. You can actually code in the middle of a debugger session, and it'll just run right through the new code instead of the old code. It's just a marvelous thing. Well, that got replaced with Java, which is compiled, which is hard to use, doesn't have that same interaction. Reflection is hard to do. The syntax is more complicated. Include a million files, blah. Now, of course, a lot of this stuff is being done with JavaScript, and JavaScript is a scripting language and not the best possible scripting language. And it's got incredibly strange behavior at the bottom, like what happens when you add a number and a letter. And it's the tools are for debugging that are as bad as the tools we had for debugging assembler code back when there was DDT and stuff, And so I think the tools aren't helping. When you look at all of the Dockers and Kubernetes and all that stuff, there's a lot of stuff that's there to structure large programs, but it doesn't really help me at all with the thing I'm really trying to do, which is down here. But I do believe that to a degree, programming is changing because of those tools, the scaling tools like Docker, Kubernetes, and stuff. And the more and more programming is assembling chunks of stuff. We have all these microprocessor services, and we just plug them together. And that is pasting it together with script, and it is different. So I think there's a class of programmers who don't experience what we did and won't because of those tools. But I think those who do the programming, I've programmed in C#, C++, and I don't want to do it again. It's powerful, it's fast, great. My iPad is faster than any commercial computer I've ever worked on. It's faster than the mainframes I worked on. It's faster than the hot minis that I used to work on. My wristwatch is probably faster than most of those computers. And so I don't really care how fast C++ is. Because
Yes.
I just don't care. If I really cared how fast it went, I would just spawn a few more instances.
C++ taught me that I can make a mess faster than I can clean the mess up.
Yeah, and oddly enough, the syntax is such that you can hardly even see the mess for the mess that the syntax just provides for your benefit. So I don't think the tools are helping us. I think in some cases they probably are in a way. But I do think the work is changing as well.
I've got a question for you. I started doing some DevOps several years back. I think DevOps isn't it? DevSecOps. It's a big thing. This is we used to just code and the damn thing would run and we'd show it to people, but now we've got a whole kind of 3 or 4 job categories. So starting to DevSecOps and you can, like you said, Kubernetes and Docker and AWS and the pipeline and CI/CD and all these terms. But what occurred to me as I was doing this, first of all, it was a hoot. I actually love doing DevSecOps because everything comes together. But then I was thinking, how would I go about teaching this? And hell, I couldn't figure it out because do you start with like an Apache server on a Linux box, and maybe a blank web? There's just such a scale now between pieces that, like you were talking, layers and stuff you glue together. Who's going to be responsible? When that web programmer calls on the wrong socket across a Kubernetes, there's so many little pieces that can go wrong that it seems like folks would just be lost on trying to figure out.
Yeah, and the thing I find, because I really don't want to do much of that, I wrote an Amazon Web Services thing that provides a database capability to Second Life, which I thought was kind of fun. So I've kind of played with those things enough. What you discover is that you go to the official documentation for how to do this thing, and you type in what the official documentation for how to do this thing says, and it doesn't work. And then you look on Stack Overflow, you can't find it. You finally tweet, and somebody says, "Oh no, what you have to do now is this," and they tell you the thing that you have to know, which is written down nowhere in the world.
It was just updated a month ago. This is the new way of doing
keep
it.
Up. They choose not to keep up, depending on how you look at it. They aren't able to keep up with what has to happen. And when you go to the next version, something will have changed that impacts you. So we have in enabling the things we've enabled, we've made a level of complexity that's excuse me, I should click off, but I don't want to do that. We've gone to a level of complexity that we just don't know yet how to manage.
I AWS has this thing called CloudFormation. When I started learning it, it's actually a tool where you can sort of decoratively describe your network configuration. This is software as a network. And then, you describe, I want these servers, I want these functions, I want this storage, and this is web, blah, 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 all the stuff, you CDN. But you put it all in this file, and it was really cool to see that. But, you've taken, 5-10 servers, each of which has their own properties and stack and all that, and you've extracted it into this, there's hundreds or thousands of lines of code. And like you said, the spec changes, or the people just sort of go to Stack Overflow and paste this stuff in. There's just a huge gap there. I can understand why it would not. I don't even know where to start. With being a programmer. So when we used to start programming, you show on the machine, you sit down at the machine. Here's basic. Here's whatever. Here's C. Here's nano, and you start coding, and they type stuff in. Stuff comes out. It's gotten to the point where experienced developers, sometimes it'll take them a week or two, and these are senior developers, to actually get in the system that a corporation set up so that they can begin programming.
Yep. Well, it has gotten awfully complicated, and as yet we apparently don't know how to hide that complication. We all know that the trick is to hide the complication, right. But as yet that hasn't been figured out. Now, one of the things that I think helps with that, and you would hope would go forward to do so, is functional programming. Because functional programs tend not to have any state. And the nicest thing about a program with no state is you can make 1,000 copies of it and use any one of them or all 1,000 of them, and they don't interfere. So if we get more and more weight coming down on the functional programming side, I think that may help with some of the complexity, because you can basically spawn as many copies as you want, and it's harmless. It doesn't entangle itself the way a database would.
That's one of the more sometimes difficult things to talk with other programmers about that haven't experienced it, is the fact that when you do write pure functional programming, the code and function can go anywhere and run and come back, and you're fine. But when you start instantiating some sort of class or object graph, there's a ton of dependencies, most of which aren't clear to you. And so when the CPU starts, going down the chain and trying to optimize the pipelines and all that stuff, you're causing a nightmare for the entire stack trying to figure out where it needs to go to do things.
Yeah, so I think maybe we'll see some leverage coming out of functional programming, but as you say, it's hard for people to understand. It's hard for people to understand what really good object code looks like, because you never see it.
Yes.
It's much more the case with functional, and in at least some cases, I think that the functional languages aren't exactly helping, because they've added in so much stuff that now they know more than they ought to about data types and things that, come on, don't do that. But I think there's leverage there to be found, and there's probably things to be discovered about how to do all of this that we don't get to, that we don't have yet. But it's when spawning 1,000 copies of my program is literally fingertips away, and they're going to do it poorly because it's easy to do poorly.
One of the things that, I guess we saw 10 or 15 years ago in OO programming was that apps would run like dogs on the web server, and the coders really wouldn't know why, and there's all instrumentation and stuff. And it would come down to stuff like string concatenation, or just things that look really easy in the OO world, string dot append, but you're actually sort of reallocating a buffer and you're doing all this stuff behind the scenes. I wonder, how much of that abstraction and information hiding is good, and how much is hurting folks. I wonder, like you said, we're going to be working little chunks that we wire together with scripts, but that's assuming that whoever's working on some level doesn't have to kind of dive 4 or 5 levels down. I'm just kind of rambling here, because these are tough problems.
They are. I think the interesting thing, I have always kind of taken the position that Yeah, if my program is too slow, I will measure it and I will find out why it's too slow, and it will always surprise me. It'll always turn out to be something like string concatenation when I thought it was really this complicated search algorithm, and it isn't at all. Measurement always, I think, surprises you. But I also think that you need to, uh, in a sense, rely on the people who are building the system software to finally figure it out. Um, the there's a really odd case that I have an existence on Second Life, which no one will ever find. Um, but I was working with somebody on a program that creates a dynamic data structure that is basically a queue of information that has been scarfed from the world and put into this thing so that this program can process it. And so it's pushing things onto the front of the stack and popping things off the back of the stack, loop, 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 in this ridiculous scripting language that Second Life has. And that means that it is recreating that list all the time. It's recreating list elements all the time. It's deleting and adding an element every time anything happens, like once every 10th of a second. This program never crashes, never slows down, never runs out of memory, because it's running on Mono, which is finally a really good version of .NET. And finally, the systems programmers have got memory allocation figured out, and now you just let the garbage collector collect it, and it doesn't fragment memory, and it doesn't run out. It doesn't suddenly pause for an hour to garbage collect like it used to in the old days. So I think they will figure those kinds of things out. But how we figure out how do you organize your clusters and how do you organize the 17 different microservices that you're using and the 27 that you've stolen from somebody else. I don't know how that's going to happen. I imagine it will, because we usually solve these things, but it's unsolved at the moment.
So we're talking sort of oddball languages and sort of odd platforms. I know nothing about this asteroids thing you're doing and the underlying tech. Could you describe that some?
The Codia things? Yeah, I have an iPad. I've had them for a long time. I mostly got it because it was easy to carry around and you could do web stuff. And I got it because I was drawing pictures. The Nature Software Development book has a picture on the hand drawn by me on every little 1 or 2 page chapter. Really horrible drawings, I might add, but they're not, I like them. So I mostly was doing that with it, but it turned out that every now and again you wish you could write a program on your iPad. And originally you couldn't write a program on your iPad at all. And then you could maybe use AppleScript or something. But all of a sudden along came this program called Codia, which is a version of Lua, which is a tiny little scripting language, a very nice tiny little scripting language, written on the iPad, runs on the iPad, can compile to Xcode, which means you could actually build an app from the thing. And when I first saw it, it actually had an app called CargoBot, which was a really fun little game that was cross-compiled across, and then could be loaded as an app. So I started trying this little thing because Codia is basically designed to do stuff on the screen and build like games and stuff like that. It's not intended to be for programming. It's intended to be like for games and 3D graphics and stuff like that. So most I guess actually even a couple 3 years ago, I decided I was going to use Codia to write Space War, because back in 19 who knows what, I had done the old Space War program on a PDP-1.
This is the text, right? The
two little guys, the two little ships.
Oh yeah, okay.
Shoot each other, circle around the sun. So I coded that up and wrote articles about it, and then more recently, I've been essentially trying to duplicate as close as possible asteroids from 1989 or whenever it was, 69, 79, whenever, and Space Invaders in the original format, Turns out on computer archaeology, you can find the source code for those in assembler, and very nice comments and write-ups that he's done. Very beautiful
Oh my God.
stories. And so I thought, well, that would be interesting to try to code up these old games and in the style of the old game. So, so I've been doing that, and then because Lua is a good enough language that you can write classes and objects and functions and all that, it gives you an opportunity to write about the kind of programming things that I care about.
So what's the Lua community like? I've came across it a few times. I think they used it to script out non-player characters in like Empire Earth. I think I've seen it in the sort of the game format where they were looking for I think it was pathfinding for non-player characters. There's various things that Lua seemed to work better for. What distinguishes it from, I don't know, Ruby or JavaScript or Java?
Lua is much lower level than Ruby or Java. It, it doesn't even really have objects or classes. It's got numbers and strings and functions, but it's got enough hooks that it can do pretty much anything with ease.
Oh goodness.
Sorry, I seem to be drying out. So you can very quickly build up a program that's got real objects, and you could probably do almost functional programming with it. Not quite. I know how to write a lambda in it, so I could do it, but it's not. It's more of a procedural kind of a language with object stuff. I haven't had much to do with the core Lua community at all. The Codia Lua has its own little forum, and the people there are very helpful and useful. To me, although it is, it's an interpreted language running on top of an iPad that's running who knows what all, it feels close to the metal. It feels a lot like it used to feel like when we were programming in assembler on our pets and things. So it has that very close to the computer feel to it.
Ooh, cool, real cool. Ron, I see you're coughing. I don't want to wear your voice out here. Anything you want to say before we bail out? Are you still alive? Wake up. There you go. Anything before we bail out? Are you working on any new books or anything that I know you're doing this blog. What kind of writing are you up to, or where can we chase down more stuff you've been doing?
Well, really, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Tell you what, I'll go on bail for now, and I'm going to take a rain check. We're going to come back. You want to come back and do something later?
Yeah, I'm trying out. Yeah, let's come back and do a little finish up, but I need a break, I think.
Okay. Hang on.
Talk to you later.
Yep. This is it for now. I'm Daniel Markham, and I will see you on the internet.